Welcome back to Squawk Box. The December jobs report due out Friday. It's going to be a critical piece of data ahead of the Federal Reserve's meeting at the end of the month. Joining us right now is Eric Rosengren, his former Boston Fed president. Eric, good morning to you. Let's talk about what you think we're going to hear towards the end of the week, and then let's get into the mindset of what you think Jay Powell is going to think about it, if you will.
So for the labor report, I don't think there are going to be many surprises. I think we're still going to be pretty close to full employment, around 4.2%, and payroll employment will come in a bit under 200,000. But I think the real news is actually not coming from the data from December, but really what happens with tariffs and immigration policy once the new administration begins to make their decisions about what exactly the policies are going to be in those two areas.
Okay, so that's the big question, though. I mean, we were talking about this Washington Post report this morning as it relates to this new administration, tariffs in particular, this idea that there's going to be tariffs across the board for what they're describing as critical items to our national security. How that's defined, I think, is going to be the big question. How do you think the Federal Reserve is supposed to think about all of this? And are they supposed to think about this ahead of any action or not?
So the Fed's going to be driven by data, and right now the core inflation already is pretty high. So if you look at the PCE, we're at 2.8%. If you look at the CPI, we're at 3.3%. And the Fed's own forecast was that at the end of this year, we're still going to be only at 2.5% for both total and core. So just based on the data, it makes sense for the Fed to pause. But the Fed does have to make a forecast. After the inauguration, there's presumably going to be more information about what the nature of particularly the tariffs are going to be. While the Fed's driven by data, the data is likely to be driven by some of the fiscal actions. And those fiscal actions in the short run are going to be driven by tariffs and immigration. In the longer run, we'll see the benefits potentially from deregulation and lower taxes. It will be good news if the Washington Post article is correct and there's going to be more flexibility on the tariffs, but I think it remains to be seen.
Eric, the thing that I can't figure out, though, about that strategy, if you will, is whether that by default means the Federal Reserve is going to be late. That no matter what, if it has to be, I'm not saying it shouldn't be data dependent, but if by default you're suggesting that you can't really put into the mix of thought what this tariff situation is going to be, which maybe you can't because we don't know. But it also means that then you're going to have this lag effect and you're going to wait and then whatever happens there behind the eight ball.
Yeah, I think most Fed, as the chair said in his press conference, many of the members did incorporate some movement related to what fiscal actions were likely to be. But I think you probably keep it at a relatively low number until you have some specifics. As just your last session just highlighted, there's some uncertainty even with China, which is probably where the tariffs are most likely to go up. The administration has talked about 60% tariffs. Those are very significant, enough that it's going to start causing a supply shock and cause people to really rethink how they do the supply chain. That doesn't change in just a quarter or a couple of quarters. That's going to be a major shift if people think this is a more permanent effect.
In terms of the employment picture, and I know you said we're not going to have any surprises, if you were to look out over the next 12 months, what do you think employment looks like in this country, given all the things that we're talking about, DOGE and everything else?
So, again, it's very hard to determine just because the policy on the fiscal side has not really been clearly described. But in terms of the immigration policy, if a large number of people are deported, it's going to cause people to move to places they think they're less likely to be deported. And it's going to cause some shortages in places where labor by immigrants is particularly important. So construction, personal services, food preparation, food in general, I think are all going to be areas that would be affected. In terms of the tariffs, it's a distortionary tax, and depending on where the tariffs are determines how much of a distortion there is and what industries are most affected. So I think we, at this point, have to just wait and see. It's not that far to the inauguration, so we're only talking about a couple weeks more, and we should be getting some more information.
Eric, thank you for your smart thoughts. Hope we can have this conversation in a couple weeks when we do know a lot more and we can get your thoughts on all of that as well. Appreciate it. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you. Thank you.